good morning. Welcome to B Cube Sunday. I'm Bob Brown, and it is what a day here. I'm surrounded by four talented writers that have all um, managed to um, write and managed. My God, their work is so good you can tell it just flows out of their soul like the tears of God, washing away anything that is imperfect on a page. They are wonderful work. Um, we the beautiful thing is that I'm going to not try and introduce them. I'm going to start and let them introduce themselves. Tara, do you want to tell us about yourself?
Okay, yeah. So I am a former lawyer and a current. I call myself a non-practicing lawyer and a practicing writer. So I spent some years as a lawyer. I spent some years raising my kids. I've spent some years as a freelance nonfiction writer, and now I am spending some years as a fiction writer.
Excellent. And I got to tell you, um, your guys are going to love. You don't know how many editors you made cry with that story. Uh, I know of at least two. Um,
Thank you.
so, as I work my way across the bottom screen on my screen, Loren, you want to tell me about yourself?
Hi, my name is Loren Davidson. When I was working a day job, I did many things over the years. My last career was as a technical writer. Um, I have also been a performing songwriter for the better part of 20 years, during which time I managed to put out about 6 albums of mostly original music. And now I am retired from day job work, and in my copious free time, I'm doing a bit of fiction writing. I live in the beautiful Republic of Panama, where there is no snow.
That's okay. There ain't going to be no snow anywhere pretty soon.
True, I'm just getting ahead of the curve. I'm going to turn one thing off here.
Okay. Well, that means that it's now time. Amy Ivory Wolf,
There
you
we
want to
go.
come tell us about yourself?
Sure. Good morning. I'm not retired. I still work as a massage therapist, energy healer, psychic medium in Seattle, Washington. And it goes better when I do my writing because then I'm not telling stories to my clients. And I tore my shoulder up a couple years ago and took some forced time off and really leaned into the writing. And I'm just super excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. And last, but oh my God, most certainly not least, is a returning B Cube Press alumni who wrote another story. Now, I just may be a sucker, but when a story brings tears to my eyes, I almost always buy it, even though I can't take credit for buying uh, Brenda Cooper's story that appeared in um, After the Orange. It takes me a moment. That is the one anthology that I had turned over completely to another writer, editor, and they managed to bring in Brenda Cooper. Brenda, tell us about yourself.
I'm a technology professional. I actually run an IT department for a local construction company in Seattle. I have been a working futurist. I give talks occasionally to groups of people about the future and try to encourage people to talk about the future because it's coming at us very, very fast right now, and it's super important to be thinking that way. That, of course, all feeds into my science fiction. I have probably 10 or 12 books out now and probably 100 stories. I've sort of stopped counting at some point. And I write mostly science fiction with a little bit of fantasy and a little bit of poetry.
Yeah. Now, speaking of poetry, none of you are poets as far as this book goes. But the book we're talking about that you are all in came about as retribution and revenge. As we were listening to Brenda, futurist, can probably just paralyzed with fear almost when you look at all of the precursors that we're seeing about what this man's vision for the economy is. I'm reminded of that store, that old store sign, if you break it, you buy it. Well, his theory is if he break it, he'll get it at a discount. But so how we go this way, we are facing some incredibly dark times. And so when we put this out, we always make poets are really good at telling us about the dark times. And so we've got, I've had to limit the number of poems in this book to 12. But we always use poems, we always use essays, and we use short stories. And in this case, we've gone over the edge and we're using a novelette. And the book originally was Retribution and Revenge, because we were preparing ourselves for Trump's revenge tour, as he's called it, or as he said, I am your retribution. And so that became the theme of the book. But then we discovered that, it was almost all about taking away the liberties that we had grown up with and replacing them with servitude. And so we swapped the name out to Alternative Liberties. Now we're toying with Alternative Liberties, Retribution and Revenge, with Alternative Liberties being a new series for us. But that's all up in the air. So given what this future we face is, what is the role do you guys think do you see of writers and artists in this?
So I want to say I woke up the day after the election, and the first thing that came to me was that in authoritarian regimes, the artists and writers and healers kept doing what we're always working and doing what they did. And that our job is to keep doing what we do, but hold up the mirror, right? What I write a fair bit of poetry, but what I see when I look at what's going on now is old Batman, like episodes from when I was a kid, and the villain was the richest guy in the world who wanted to own everything. And like, we're there. Like, Musk is just a Batman villain to me.
Oh, isn't Elon Musk a walking Lex Luthor?
Or the Riddler, or the Joker, or
A little more hair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts on this subject, Loren? I see we got you piped in there.
Well, on the role of the writer, I think that part of our job is to use our imaginations to help people make the connections among things that they may not otherwise be making for themselves. This thing that is happening here, it's actually going to affect what you are doing over here in this way that you haven't thought of.
Oh, Brenda has.
Well, yeah, I've been one of my neurodivergences is identifying patterns, and I've seen this on its way for probably about 20 years. And things that have fed into that, including the ongoing fecklessness of the Democrats, for example, to stop organizing their firing squads in circles and start paying attention to the larger problem, damn it.
Well, and I'm not going to say any innocence on the part of that the Democrats ran the most organized, best. They probably did the best they could when the news media that purported to be on the left was so strongly committed to. Ask yourself this, guys: how many stories did CNN do analyzing every word that Tim Walz ever said and raising useless, pointless questions about his service. You know, when did he retire? You know, they amplified the stories from the right, because don't ever forget who owns the broadcast companies, who owns the media companies. They stood to lose money in their share of ownership of the world under a Harris campaign, where suddenly Elizabeth Warren is the secretary of is getting to help influence laws. So I will say the Democrats were feckless, but I'll also say a lot of them got convinced to stay home. But anyway, that's not me. That's me just ranting.
Does some of that go back to the Communications Act that Bill Clinton signed, allowing more consolidation of stations?
Oh, the ending of the fairness. Who?
It wasn't the ending of the fairness doctrine. It was an antitrust thing that he lifted, I think, to allow one company or fewer companies to own more stations.
Oh yeah.
That didn't help. Let's say that.
Our local media is all owned by Sinclair.
Right.
But anyway, what were you were going to tell us something there, Tera?
Oh, I was going to, well, to answer your question about the role of the artists and the writers in this new world, I actually started my story, which is about a society where women literally do not have a voice, before the election. And then when we started to see Your Body, My Choice, it became clear that my story was, I mean, maybe I should talk with Brenda more about predicting the future. I mean, I think that it's just not that far-fetched to think that might happen to us when this is how things are turning out after the election. And since the election, I would say my writing has been more angry and more looking for characters who have more agency and find a way to have agency in a world that is trying to keep agency from them. So maybe next anthology you'll see something like that.
All right. Good comments, all. I want to add a little bit. I think that it's not only writers' role, but everybody's role at this point not to give up. Giving up is the thing that will really cause us or potentially cause us to fail. I've read a number of articles that have said, hey, you know, when you give in to a dictator, when they are just beginning to say, hey, I want to be a dictator, and you give in and you say, oh, okay, you're a dictator, I'm going to roll over, this can cause that to happen. While continuing to fight, it can get out of it. Some of these were from people where Viktor Orban is, who said, hey, we gave in to Viktor Orban way too early. We said, okay, we're going to allow you to, you know, essentially take away our liberties. Bob, I love the change in title to alternative liberties. And so I think it behooves all of us, whether it's fighting with our voice in a way that we might be seen or heard, which is what writers and artists and songwriters and other people do, is maybe put ourselves a bit at risk. But it's really up to everybody else being able to make comments as well. And Andrew, I love that comment, except I wouldn't say the new prophets. I think writers and artists have always been our prophets. But great comment.
Tim Snyder calls that obeying in advance. And somebody mentioned last week we need to update that to groveling in advance for our news media.
Yeah, and I think to go back to the other question, I think the fairness doctrine is the thing that put us on this path. Losing the fairness doctrine in 1987 is really the thing that we can look back to and say, that has now created all these media and media. Well, I guess they're all media, but they're not all news. All these media outlets that can say whatever they want and give people some idea that is not true, that is not accurate, and then they make choices based on things that are not accurate.
Yeah, Citizens United is on my list as well.
Yeah.
I'd like to switch the conversation a little tiny bit to letting everyone talk for a moment about how you hope to thrive in the next few years. Bob had to step away for a sec, so I'm wanting to hear from each of you what will help you as writers both continue to have your voice and continue to thrive in spite of all these difficult things. Where do you go in difficult moments? Because we're all living in them. Let's go ahead and start with Amy.
Oh, so one place I go is off Twitter into Blue Sky, which is woman owned. So let's say there's some women taking their power, and is not, being run with the express purpose to hand the country to oligarchs and Republicans. I go to my spiritual community. I go to Sweat Lodge. I go to my writing. I go offline a bit more and don't follow all the minutia of the stuff they're doing. But yeah, I don't know that I have a better. I want to say organizing. I haven't figured out where I fit in with that, and what I can usefully do, because I'm thoroughly sick of taking to the streets. Quite frankly, what I've seen, once I found out that when you protest and the cops pull overtime, it actually raises their retirement pay. All I see when we protest is that we're costing the city a whole lot of money, and putting money in cops' pockets. But yeah, that's a minority opinion. I'll probably do it anyway.
Maybe I can add a brief protest comment. Protesting in Seattle often feels like, preaching to the already, people who have already decided that. But I have protested a couple of times in Washington, D.C., and that's way more fun.
That's different. Yeah.
Loren, what's your go-to?
Oh, just briefly on the footnote on the subject of protests. Back when that guy was first inaugurated and there were the women's marches in 2017, I was in one down in Sarasota, Florida, which is not Seattle from the perspective of preaching to the people who are already converted. That's pretty red country. Mm-hmm. On the subject of what I do, well, first of all, living as I do outside the U.S., I automatically have a layer of insulation between me and everything going on. Being retired, I don't have income that really relies on it. So I'm blessed. I'm privileged and I am grateful for it. But when I need to disconnect and renew, I go outside. I garden in my copious free time. I was just out watering the bananas before I came in here for this. I read. Part of being a writer means reading extensively. Part of being a writer of mostly urban fantasy means I read a lot of urban fantasy, and there's a lot of escapism built right into there. And I have my own spiritual practices from various corners of the universe, which help me self-regulate, whether it's just breathing or doing a gratitude moment or whatever, to just get me out of whatever spiraling pattern I may have been stuck in at that moment.
Okay, and I want to go to you next, Tera, but real quickly, I want to invite people who are watching and who can comment to go ahead and put in, what are your go-tos? How are you keeping yourself healthy during this time? Tera?
So my antidote to despair is action. And so I find it where I can. I'm involved in my local chapter of Moms Demand Action. And specifically, the work that I am most excited and interested in with gun violence prevention is community gun violence prevention organizations. There are a lot of them in the Seattle area, but they're in every major urban area. They're probably in lots of areas I don't know about too. And they are actually out there in the world interrupting violence, patterns of violence, looking at the root of violence, and trying to solve those problems, not from once the violence has occurred, but trying to prevent it from happening in the first place. And so I do that to try to maintain my sanity. And then of course, like it's taxing to be involved in a world that is so growing more and more dystopian. And so like Loren, I try and find ways, and like Amy too, try and find ways to like connect with my family and my friends and just take care of myself too.
Yeah, I think this is probably going to be a really important time for all of us to work on connecting in community. And in fact, that was a movement I saw amongst a number of my writer friends and even some of my liberal friends at work, was just rather than falling directly into despair, although I think there was a little bit of that, it was really saying, okay, how can we help each other? What are the small things that matter to help us get through this? There's big things we can do. There's protesting, there's writing books or stories, there's writing articles, there's writing excellent poetry. But I think it's also pretty interesting to be able to just do something to help other people, directly, go give somebody something, help a guy on the street who can't afford a cup of coffee, get a cup of coffee, donate money or time to something. I think all of those things help as well. And I see been sitting on Facebook, refreshing and refreshing. Oh, I see. Oh, you got on now. Fine. Yes, Bunny Slippers, we see you. Can you? I'm assuming you can hear us since you're commenting. So there we go.
Can I add
Are
one
we on
more thing to
Facebook
that?
now?
Yes, we're on Facebook.
Yeah, we're probably streaming on Facebook. Yeah,
Okay.
Amy, go ahead.
So I want to say also, for me, it's important to support the the young Democrats who are being successful, the Justins in Tennessee, the other names that aren't Crockett, and I can spend a bunch of time lamenting Schumer didn't do this or Feinstein didn't do that, or I can go directly and support, the people who are succeeding and really fighting and getting up and fighting every day. So
a piece of your comment really sparked something for me. I watched the fight with AOC and that old person. I don't remember, the 74-year-old that ended up staying on the committee instead of letting AOC run it.
yeah.
And we're all, everyone on this panel, including Bob, we're all in the last probably half of our lives anyway. We're not 10 or 17 or 25 or even 35. What can we do to help young people? So you mentioned supporting them, but what can we really do to both get out of their way and support them? And I'll add a little small piece as well, which is to learn from them. We have a 28-year-old daughter, I think, who lives in DC and who was continually refreshing my viewpoint on the world from a pretty boomer viewpoint to really, seeing things in fresh ways. So how can we interact with and support younger people, and maybe particularly younger writers, given that we're really talking about writing here?
I have an idea. I mean, I have a good, a dear beloved teen in my life who is in the climate action community. Mm-hmm. And I know that she often hears, keep up the good work, good job, we're counting on you. And I know what she would like is for us to actually act in the ways that she is advocating, to be part of the movement. So I think one way we support them is by joining them.
What comes to my mind is we can fight the narrative. People say, oh, AOC is popular with the young people. I always jump in. I love AOC. I love, like just fight that narrative that old people like myself, aren't supporting the younger politicians. And I'm always pestering my friends in Tennessee about the amazing politicians they have there, and showing them the video of Justin Jones singing with Joan Baez in the airport, right? So how iconic is that, right? Yeah.
Loren, any thoughts?
I'm sorry, I lost the train of things for a brief moment because I was digging out where we are online and getting it up onto Facebook so people can actually find.
Bless you. All right. So I'll give you the train of thought, then I'll come back to you.
Question.
I will. Let me first give a question I'm going to hand out to everybody, which says, what are you reading now that's relevant? And then I'm going to say, Loren, the question is, how do we connect with and support younger people and or learn from them, whether it be in politics or as writers or anyone else that's in this fight that is younger? How do we help them?
That's a hell of a good question. I'm not entirely sure what I have to add to that particular part of the discussion. The people I mostly hang out with online are of a wide variety of ages. People I hang out with in person here are mostly, of our general age range. And I haven't put a lot of thought towards specifically how can I better reach these people here. In my own writing, I read a lot of stuff from younger authors and written from a perspective of younger characters. And over time, I'm trying to get better at absorbing little bits of how that makes them think and feel and stuff like that. Because I have to do that if I'm going to write characters in those age ranges credibly.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think something we can all do, Loren, and you mentioned reading younger writers, and I think for any writers, particularly for writers who are part of this fight, who are writing about whether it be climate or politics or women's rights, let's amplify that work. So if we read that work and we get a chance to mention it in our social media, if we get a chance to mention it to our friends or our family, I think that can be super useful. Okay, I'm going to come back to you guys in just a moment for books you're reading. I want to mention a comment from Andrew Roberts that says, as a poet, I've been composing like a madman since November, and being privileged to see my work regularly published reminds me of my responsibility to use my craft wisely for the society that I live in. So we're going to go to books, and then after that, I think that comment sparked a bit of a good question. So I'll mention one book that I just finished, and then we'll go around and see what other people are reading. And I really don't care if you're reading comfort food books to get away from it, or if you're reading books that are part of the fight. But I just finished Navalny's really moving. It's sort of a biography. I'm not sure if you can quite call that, called Patriot, but it basically goes through all of the things that he did in order to try to help Russia, and the things that Russia did to him, which ended up killing him. And
what's the name of it?
Patriot. It is by Alexander Navalny, and it was written posthumously after he died in essentially a gulag. But it was a good warning for us as to where some people may want to take our ability to have voices, because he basically attempted to use free speech in Russia to speak out against Putin, and of course that didn't go so well for him. And we don't want to be in a world where us speaking about the kinds of things we're speaking about in this podcast ends up putting us in jail for long periods of time. So anybody else have other books? And once more, audience, feel free to add through comments.
I've been reading a lot of dystopian YA kind of dystopians. And I also just finished On Call by Anthony Fauci, which is his autobiography. And so I'm looking at history and I'm looking at future concepts. But his autobiography is amazing in that he's had an amazing life. And this sort of the story of public health through his eyes is worth looking at, because there are a lot of lessons for the future.
Yeah, and there's some really interesting public health comments and stories that are going to be coming forward over the next while, and we'll probably have some interesting conversations.
Yeah.
All right, Amy or Loren, anybody have a book to offer?
I haven't been reading a lot. Like lately, I read Alternative Apocalypse to see what kind of writing Bob liked. But what's coming to mind is Terry Pratchett as both fun, but also the deepest, most incisive comment on people's emotional, petty motivations for what goes on politically. I just think he just tears society apart and shows us to ourselves. And I have been reading some in the literature of codependence in adult children of alcoholics. And where that ties into politics is I keep seeing people saying that Republicans or people want a strong daddy figure. And I'm like, how do we like unwind this where people get their own power back and don't feel like daddy's going to come rescue them? You know what I mean? As adults, it's fine if you're a kid. So,
Loren?
For inspiration and mellowing things right now, I have been reading a book titled Braiding Sweetgrass. Robin Wall Kimmerer, I think, is the author's name. I space on names, so some of the things I may pop up with in the next couple of minutes may be incomplete data, and I don't have my Kindle sitting right here, so I can't just pop it open to look at things. When it gets into recreational reading, I've just finished a 6-book urban fantasy series by Michael Anderle, who writes a lot of things. This one was kind of based off of Norse mythology, creeping into our regular world. I read a lot by authors like Heather G. Harris and a number of the other authors in that constellation of new urban fantasy authors. I'm just about halfway through World War Z. I mean, I am not normally a zombie person, but this is not really a zombie book. It's kind of recollections from different people 10 years after it's all over. And what it is, it's a complete book of little vignettes that are really character studies of people who run the entire range from semi-noble to totally yuck. And I'm reading them at this point as much to get an understanding of how to depict those types of characters as anything else. But the narrative, despite being chopped up into little bits of just assembling the mosaic of colored glass, it's compelling.
All right. I'd like to go back now and thank you all for your reading recommendations. And I'm seeing some show up in the comments as well. I also hear there may be a problem with commenting. I think that Bob may be looking into that. I wanted to go back to the things we wrote for this anthology and not talk necessarily about the stories themselves. I'll let Bob decide if he wants people to do that or not. But, how do you balance writing something that's really about a cause or about an issue with making it an interesting story? Because that for me is always a balance. I've been writing about climate for maybe the last 10 years. Most of my work has been about climate one way or another, even off-planet work ending up being about climate. And of course, you can't be too preachy or your book is only going to preach to the choir and isn't going to reach anybody else. So how do you three as writers balance making your story interesting and yet getting across the point that's driving you to write that particular story? And I'll start with Tera this time.
Yeah, I mean, I write the story first and then I look for a home for it. So I write what I feel called to write, what the story that comes to me and that is, running around in my brain. And then I look for a place for it, and I found B Cubed and hoped it might fit, and I'm happy that it was a good fit. So I don't think that I'm not writing with a message in mind other than the message that the story brings to me.
But how do you keep your character, how do you keep the story so that your characters or your story itself stays front and center, even though you have a theme to it?
Yeah.
I mean, you must have, or Bob wouldn't have taken the story. So I know you succeeded.
I try to go with themes that feel real to me, that feel, I know my story is fiction, but I try and go with themes that resonate and feel real. And
okay. So just writing the things that matter to you. Loren, do you have any comments?
Well, actually, on this collection, I did the exact opposite of Tera. I saw the call for submissions, And I'm like, maybe I could write something that would work for this. I mean, I have in the past done a lot of what do I have that might fit this call, but I've started doing more writing to spec in the last year, and it's being very good for my professional development and personal development. So I looked at that and I'm like, okay, what would be a good, compelling story to work with? And I had just a couple of weeks prior um, watched Casablanca, which I do about once a year, whether I need to or not. And partly in the run up to the election, I wanted a little bit of inspiration there. And I'm like, okay, what is in here that, I mean, it's a story of resistance, basically. And what is at its heart? What can I pull out of it? I mean, I cannot write Casablanca and it's already been done. But I looked at the character arc of Richard Blaine, who starts off his story. He is an expat living in another country, can't go back to the US for whatever reason. By the end of the story, and his position at that point is I stick my neck out for nobody. And by the end of the story, he has been sticking his neck out and it has changed things. And so that's where I started. And because I live in Central America, I have a little bit of understanding of expat life down here. Write what you know.
Yeah.
And so I created somebody living up across the border from me in Costa Rica who'd been there since like 2019 because I wanted to have him in and settled before the pandemic. And one day he's sitting in this bar. It's not his bar. It's just a place that people go to drink in the little town that his eco farm is outside of. And his brother, whom he hasn't seen since before he moved down, shows up, has tracked him down somehow, and says basically 3 words: "They took Mom." And that's what drives the entire story. That and an understanding of how things work in Central and Latin America, where people know people know people, and just pulling together the bits to kind of make it work. And the town of Moctezuma, Mexico, exists. It's safely south of the U.S. border. That it's probably not a bad place for a safe house. And out of that came the title of Moctezuma's Rescue, which of course plays on the old Montezuma's Revenge.
Okay, thank you. And that sounded a lot like the piece of it is really coming up with a realistic, for you, is coming up with a very realistic story. And I want to
It's all about the people. When it comes down to it, it's how does this affect individual people?
It's always about the people. One of my first lessons as a writer is I was hanging around with Larry Niven and Steve Barnes, and I went to a convention with them, and I was a baby writer, which means I was busy thinking about how do you say someone's talking and where do you put the parentheses? I mean, literally baby writer. I mean, like I knew exactly negative nothing. And I was super, super engaged in things like punctuation. And I went there and sat in the green room with them all, and they were all talking about story and character, and nobody was talking about any of these basic things. It was a really good lesson about the importance of story and character. I want to go back to one other comment you said, and then Amy, I'm going to go to you on this question. So my quick comment, Loren, you mentioned that writing to submission calls has been very good for you. And I want to say it's a good idea to write to either submission calls or a prompt. And because when you do that, it forces you to think about something in a way you maybe didn't. I mean, different things work for different writers. There's no one way that writing works for anybody. But I have a little writing group, and we every Christmas write some silly little writing prompt for our Christmas stories that we read to each other. And one of them just won a fabulous award for this little writing prompt story, And so, there's just it gets us out of our heads sometimes, and it can be really fun to write something. It helps me sometimes write something unexpected. I also wrote mine just as a direct submission to this, Amy, let's go to you
Oh.
on thinking about how to balance story and cause.
Oh, okay. So I wrote to the prompt on this one. That's a really good question. So I've been in a writing workshop with a beat poet named Clive Matson for a couple years now, almost. And we write to prompts a lot, and the answer is I'm now used to bouncing my stuff off of people. And what I found over the course of that workshop is if I'm passionate about it, that comes through. But yeah, I don't know. I have to be in the zone. Like this story, when I saw the prompt, I immediately had an idea for a story and I started writing it. And as I talked to other people about the story, I would say, well, I'm writing this because this and this and this happened to me. And then I finally went, well, why don't I just write that down and get it out of the way? And I sent it to Bob in that sense that this is the story I had to write to get out of the way so I can write the story I want to write for you, which of course I haven't finished yet. And then he accepted it. And so it was because it came from my personal experience and from a place of being really invested. I don't know. If I'm trying to write for a cause, it's a mess, but just coming from the heart and coming from passion. And then some people are going to hate it. I put in the comments a link to a poem I had. I started writing a whole lot when Israel started bombing Gaza, because I have relatives who were involved in the founding of Israel. I feel very implicated. And, of course, that polarized my friend base somewhat. But, yeah, I don't know. I think that I can't write about a cause unless it's passionate, right? So I'm not sure that answered your question.
Well, it's hard to write about anything you don't really believe in. Let's talk about something else that sort of relates to writing to mission calls like this one. I mean, this was interesting because I saw it like 10 days before the story was due and went, okay, sure, I'll do this one. And I think my story came out better than I expected it to. I was sort of pleasantly surprised. And one of my more reprinted stories from about 10 years ago was one I literally sat down and wrote because I was trying to figure out if I could get my connected keyboard to work on my iPad. So I wasn't even thinking about writing. Mm-hmm. So, and that story published and made a year's best that year, which was, I literally spent an hour on it, and this only happens to people who spend hours generally only happens to people who actually spend hours writing. And then you have the skills to suddenly get out of your way. But talk about your own experiences with the impact of deadlines on your writing. And it doesn't have to be that they're good or bad for you, but just tell me a little bit about how time factors into your writing. And then, Bob, I see you're coming back, so you could probably pop back in here with any questions you might have.
I want to say I probably wrote this one in an hour and didn't rewrite it. But I had spent hours and hours on the other story that I'm still not done with. So
this one I would bet this one may even be better. I don't know yet because I haven't read
this one is certainly better than the one I'm trying at. If I'm trying and trying, it's generally not very good. If it just comes out, it's often good. Sometimes it's not.
Yeah. All right.
That's
Tera.
my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think I get a little deadline paralysis, which is why I do sometimes write to prompts. I feel like I misled you earlier. Sometimes I write to prompts, but only if I have enough time. I think I get deadline paralysis. I need to write for the sake of writing and less for the sake of a deadline in order to really be effective.
Okay, and that underscores my comment earlier that there's no one right way. And I do both, okay? But my best stories have almost always been written fast, which is very strange. No, Amy, I see your question. Did you mean the one I'm working on hard will come? No, I think sometimes the things that come out of our subconscious instead of our conscious are our best stories. Mm-hmm. Now, you may still have to apply the conscious writer who knows what the heck they're doing to the editing process. So don't get me wrong, but I've often found that things that just show up almost like they're whole cloth given to you as a gift are often very, very powerful stories, at least for me. Loren, what's your experience with deadlines and time?
Well, in my regular life, I tend to self-distract very easily. But in this particular case, I saw the call, and between seeing that and running things over in my head and getting the first draft completely done was 3 days. I then took a day for second guessing and editing, and then I wrapped it up and I sent it off to Moksha's for the slush pile, and I was like, well, yeah, I could possibly have like continued tweaking and tweaking and tweaking, but the story is the story, and the decisions that I made along the way to get it to that place, I felt comfortable and confident about having made. And when the writing is good, sometimes it'll come out like that. I'll see 3 or 4 possible paths in my brain, and it'll be like, this one looks most interesting and looks like it'll get to where I might want to go with this. And when I'm doing that, I'm in what I guess Stephen Barnes would call the flow.
Yes, that is exactly what. And flow state is super, super powerful. I want to mention a similar thing. Andrew Roberts in the comments says, my poetry always comes out best when I let my id off its leash. And I think that's a good comment. When we aren't in any kind of fear, but are just going, sometimes that makes the most powerful writing for me. If I'm not afraid of how badly I'll do, or what if the story doesn't come out right, or what if I can't pull it off, or whatever, I actually have all the skills I need, other than I let my fear get in my way and stop me sometimes. So let's do one more like writerly story, and then maybe we'll go to a little bit of politics, because that's also fun. Or, hey, Bob's back. Yay. One more.
I had to come back. You were gonna shoot me after we got done.
You're right. You just abandoned me and said, take it over. I got to go let the dog out.
They were doing such good stuff, and it was like, oh, yeah, I need to go find out why nobody can comment. And it's like, yeah, okay. Anyway, back to you, Brenda.
It's just because I love moderating. I like moderating at cons even more than I like being on panels. It's fun to pull things out from other people. I think my last writerly question, to see if I can remember it now, is more about, what do you do when you get stuck? We just talked about being unstuck and in flow state, but we all get stuck sometimes too. So what do you do when you get stuck? And let's start with Tera. You're nodding.
Yeah, I work on something else. I go work on something else and let my subconscious, you talked about the subconscious. I think it frees my subconscious to think about what I really need to work on. So I work on something else, either like writing work or just some other work, craft work, housework, chores, whatever. And then it gives then I can re-enter the experience of working on that first thing later, and somehow everything is much clearer.
So let it go and let your hindbrain work on it.
Yeah.
Loren?
Very much the same. I mean, being as ADD as I am, it's very easy for me to just say, okay, I'm not sure what comes next. Check email, get up, walk around the house, put some steps on the step counter, and somewhere in the process of putting the steps on the step counter, I'll be thinking, and the next 3 paragraphs will pop into my brain, and I'll come sit down and I'll write that. And maybe 2 more paragraphs beyond that, and then I'll stop again because I won't know what's next. And I'll get up and wander around and fix myself a snack or whatever. And the next little bit will come in. And sometimes this process will pull me all the way through, especially once I'm past the first part of the story and I have half an idea of where I want to end up. 1,500, 2,000 words in a day, which for me is a big day of writing. I don't think I've gone much past 2 on any given day. Sometimes it'll be step back from the narrative. What don't I know about these characters, this setting, this situation that would help me to do the next part? So I'll stop and think about that. In one case, I diagrammed out the floor plan of a double wide mobile home, so that I had so I could like plug in the logistics of they're coming in here, they're doing this, these people are back here, etc. It depends. And sometimes it's just, I have to put this down for a few days and go on and do something else. But I try not, because if I stay away more than a couple, 3 days from all the writing, my muse decides to go take a break, and I have to seduce her back into helping me again. So I'll try to at least write something every day. This is another Stephen Barnes thing, at least a sentence a day, whether it's part of this work or prep for something else, or this morning, among other things, I got a title I might use sometime, just something. And oftentimes that will kick other things loose up here and out here.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested in phenomenal life and writing advice, you could do worse than follow Stephen Barnes. I've learned a lot from him and was lucky enough to be around when he was first putting together life writing and get to help him a little bit with some of his first life writing work 30 years ago. I am old. All right. Last comment I want to mention, before I turn to Amy, is that I really enjoy the idea of going out and moving around. Moving around is really important. Getting your body moving can sometimes help get your soul or your back brain or whatever it is you're working on, give it the ability to get some work done. Amy, how about you? What do you do?
Yeah, so I mean, what they said, first of all, I have to do other things. I have work I have to go to, so that's built in that I get up and go work. I was writing first thing in the morning for a while, first cup of coffee poems. But usually if I feel stuck, I'll sit there and try to get unstuck. And if it feels forced, I get up and do something else. My go-to is always go take a walk in the woods, find a sweat lodge, something. Yeah, I don't know that I have any better answer than that. And sometimes I'll switch from one, well, okay, I don't want to work on this story. I'll work on that one because I've got 3 or 4 different things going. But, the other thing I'll do is I'll drop in on Clive's Tuesday night, Too Busy to Write, because they read prompts and then everybody goes off camera for an hour and writes, and then you come back and read it to each other. So there's no edit, there's no rewrite, and it's in the moment and you have X amount of time. And I would write for half an hour and go do other stuff and come back, and it got me in the moment. So
that sounds like a really good idea. I like that. One last comment on Steve Barnes before I turn this over to Bob. Bob, come on back in when you're ready. Is that I probably would not be a published writer today if it weren't for Steve. So I owe him that, the fact that I've been able to accomplish that. All right, go ahead, Bob.
Brenda, I would like to thank you, first of all, for helping out on a day of technical issues. You are my hero. And to have somebody of your caliber, skill set, and absolute personal charm and charisma to do that is an awesome thing. So thank you. Now, I wanted to do one little thing special.
Yay.
Oh, wow.
Ooh,
Wow.
That's kind of cool.
I like that.
Wow.
You guys are the first public group of people to see this.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm. That's nice.
Yeah.
I feel like she's getting ready to wrap that chain around Elon Musk's neck.
You mean the future Speaker of the House, or?
I thought he was co-president.
Well, I think he's going to be both. But until he finds out, Trump wakes up one morning and realizes that he's watching the chief of staff walk by his office on his way to Elon Musk's office to find out what to do that day. And then it'll be an interesting world. But I just wanted to say that getting to do this book and working with Jay O'Connell, the artist who did that work there for us, if you like his work, I can tell you he did 12 covers for Brenda Clough and has done covers for virtually everybody in the world. He is a brilliant human being, and I think I'm probably going to have him on here, maybe with Brenda too. But
So you
no,
can escape again?
Death will not release you, Brenda.
no, it's a good day. I've known Brenda for as long as I've been going to conventions. She has been a rock solid presence that has been enjoyed at every opportunity to meet. But I look forward to all of you guys becoming people that I get to meet and have on this show and occasionally because just let me share the details of what we've got and what we've done. Right now, we have a new book that came out in October called Southern Truths. And that book is a great book. I will tell you, I mean, I have my name sitting there on the cover next to the editor. And that one is one we did with Karen G. Anderson. And it was great and fun to work. So before we go into me closing this show out, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to say something about your work, or ask you to say something about your work, because that is why you're here, and that's what brings people to be interested in looking for your name, is when your work gets them. So why don't we? See. Let's start with Amy.
Oh, shoot. So most of my work is unpublished. I have a WordPress site, soundandmountains.com. I have a few poems on New Verse News. I might drop them in the comments on Facebook. I dropped one in the comments. A bunch of out-of-print stuff in a Druid magazine called The Sound. And I have a poem coming out in a book called Human Rights Day out of Moonstone Arts Collective in Philadelphia in January. It's about Charlena Lyles, who was killed by Seattle PD. And I'm quite sure I'm forgetting some things, but my work is in the future, so you're going to have to talk to Brenda about it. It exists now, but it'll be published in the future. It's futuristic. It's not futuristic. I write poetry and I write short stories, and I'm working on a piece about my great uncle who graduated Pratt Institute of Fine Art and then was lobotomized because he was gay, and spent the rest of his life in state mental hospital. So that's very cheerful. And I met him once, and I'm writing his story.
Well, now that since I've asked Brenda to talk for me for all this time, she did a great job. Much better than less raspy voice. Tell us about your work, Brenda.
Well, I'm pretty easy to find. Not necessarily on bookshelves right now because I have anything out recent as far as novels, but you can find me on Amazon, etc. And I write all over the place. The book I want to actually talk about right now, it's called Beyond and Within Solar Punk, and this is short stories for many futures. It's not. I have a story in here. It's edited by Francesco Versa, and it has writers from all over the world writing about future, a hopeful future. Solar punk, by definition, is looking for hopeful futures. So I want to mention, if people get a chance and they like short stories and they're interested in picking something up, it's also got beautiful production values. It's just a well put together little small hardback book, and I really recommend people who get a chance to go ahead and pick this up. Solar Futures, Stories from Many Futures, or Solar Punk, Stories from Many Futures, edited by Francesco Versa. So that's the one I'll push. It does have one of mine in it. It's my most reprinted Solar Punk story.
And if I can throw in a small plug for the first book Brenda wrote that I ever read, called Harlequin's Moon, which was co-authored with her and a really good up-and-coming writer by the name of Larry Niven. That was a brilliant book. And I mean, I can honestly say it was one of the most intense world-building books I've ever seen.
You should have seen the catalog or the world-building stuff we put together. a lot of the brilliance in that is Larry, and I was a lot of the character, but that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you did a great job. Now, the Tera,
Yes.
let's hear about your work.
So I have a short story in the Beneficium Feminae, which is a feminist horror. It's an anthology of feminist horror stories. I think that there are lots of great stories in this, and I was excited to be able to have one in it. It's by Amaranth Publications and available on their website or on Amazon. And then I'm going to give a plug for this little literary journal. Oh, here, Moss Puppy. I have something in the Boneyard. This was written to a prompt too. And they just did such a nice job, like for this very lovely literary journal full of poetry, art, short stories, and you can read this one online for free too. So those are my two most recently published short stories.
Well, thank you, and I am glad to know that we will get to add to your bio or your bibliography. It is an honor.
Thank you.
Now, Loren.
All right, most of my published creative work is musical. I used to be a performing songwriter. I released 6 albums. My music mostly is around the Jimmy Buffett kind of vibe. None of it is in print anymore because it's impossible to ship anything from Panama to the U.S. So I just gave up having physical inventory. But I have a YouTube channel and a website, both of which are under my name. The YouTube channel has pretty much everything on it. Plus, I'm on most of the streaming services. And I probably still have songs available on iTunes and some of those for people who actually still buy music rather than renting it. I will now have, this is going to be my 3rd published short story. I tend toward urban fantasy, though this has no fantasy elements, though I may have something else in this universe that brings in a Bigfoot. Who knows? But speaking of Bigfoot, I did get a story published in this anthology a year ago, Bigfoot Country by Alex McGivery. The story title is Passing for Human. And it was a very nice place to go to get into something printed. There's also a short story floating around on a site called Everyday Stories called, I think, Unexpected Sneakers, which is a flash fiction. But I am continually working on new material. Bob, if you do another anthology on this theme, I have a couple of things I'm already noodling on in the same universe but different places, is where this one came out of.
Well, I will say thank all of you for sharing that, because you've got a fan on here telling us that they really like your music. Okay, guys, there you go. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for, first of all, submitting to this. This is going to be our 20-somethingth book. I don't know which number. I lose track. Because when you get to be my age, it's not, the biggest lie you tell yourself is that I'll remember. So I don't try anymore. And I just thank you all for showing up. And I am excited to be working with you as we go into the edits, formatting, promotion, because when we talk about one thing I want to add, when we talk about alternative liberties, we're not talking about me. I am the guy sitting in the background playing with the keyboard, much like today. The real work's being done by people like Lou Berger and by Cliff Winnig and Karen Anderson, KG Anderson, Phyllis Irene Radford, Deborah Godfrey. You mentioned that you had a copy of Alternative Apocalypse. Deborah Godfrey, working with a wonderful person off on the East Coast, Becky Kyle, went through 900 submissions to turn that book into something real. And it was a marvelous piece of work. And so while I get to stand here in my fancy overalls and dire need of a haircut and such, I am simply in awe of the people that have been doing the real work behind the scenes, and say thank you to each and every one of them, because like I said, just like Brenda carried the water today, they carry the water every day on BQ Press. So thank you all, and to all a good night.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Brenda.
I'm thrilled to be on the show, man.
Hey, it was fun having you, all of you. And